Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show. AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you today. I want you to meet my morning stars on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. All of our shows are there. All of them. So you don't want to miss Bernie Sanders. We've had him. Bernie Sanders and Reverend Jesse Jackson had a reunion on our show. Go back into the archives and you can find those there. For example, we've had a lot of folks on the show, a lot of folks, Nina Turner, and just so many people, Ro Khanna, and on and on and on and on. And you call in. So please go to the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, like and subscribe, and then click that bell so that whenever we come up live, you'll be notified. And of course, go to Facebook to the Santita Jackson and Friends page, the Santita Jackson and Friends page, and then, of course, to Twitter, also known as X, at Santita J is my handle, at Santita J. We have got a lot to talk about. Breaking news, O.J. Simpson, the iconic O.J. Simpson, made his transition, having died of cancer today, as I'm taping this show, at the age of 76. There's a lot to unpack about his life and legacy, and we will be doing it with two tremendous blockbuster panels. But something else major is happening. We have watched Julian Assange, this case. It means so much because what about the whistleblower? What about the person who uncovers bad behavior? What about the person who uncovers bad behavior, who uncovers illegalities, who uncovers things that hurt all of us? And people are calling me right now. It's unbelievable. But what about these people who really...
Are you there, Daryl?
They're being punished for telling the truth. They're being punished because they're uncovering illegalities. That is what has happened with Julian Assange. And remember, the press, not the media, the press, is the only protected professional class in our Constitution. Because the founding fathers and mothers knew that if we did not have a free and open press, the Republic would never survive. So what about Julian Assange? What is happening with his case? Biden says he is considering, get this, everybody, Australia's request to drop the prosecution of Julian Assange. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. Chip Gibbons, you have been in the courtroom in London looking at, really, we're trying to figure out if he will be extradited. If he is extradited, what will happen? If he comes here, will President Biden, will he pardon him? Well, what's going to happen here? Talk to us. What is the latest? Because it has been how many years since he went to the Ecuadorian embassy?
Since went to the Ecuadorian embassy, but April 11th marked the 5th anniversary of Julian Assange being arrested by the London police. And it was an extraordinary event because it's very rare for a country to invite another country's police into their embassy. Julian spent 7 years in the embassy, in Ecuadorian embassy in London. And then he has now spent 5 years in Belmarsh prison, which has been compared to Guantanamo Bay as one of the harshest prisons in the UK. It is a high security prison. It is for people who threaten the national security. It is a very inhospitable environment. And I just want to give some backdrop as to why Julian Assange had gone into the Ecuadorian embassy, because there is a lot of confusion about this. There were allegations that never resulted in charges in Sweden about sexual misconduct by Julian Assange. A lot of people think he fled. He didn't. He stayed in Sweden and answered their questions. He then left Sweden. He's not a Swedish citizen. And then Sweden filed an extradition request to question him further. They didn't charge him. He wasn't wanted for a crime. They wanted to extradite him to answer more questions. And Julian Assange had asked the Swedish government to provide an assurance that he would not be extradited to the U.S. At this time, there was a secret grand jury in Virginia investigating WikiLeaks, and he was concerned he would be sent to the U.S., either extradited or using this other legal principle, the name I'm blanking out on, where they could have released him to the U.S. from a Swedish jail to testify before the grand jury. And what he was asking for is this fancy word in international law called non-refoulement, which is the idea that you cannot deport or extradite or send someone to a country that is going to persecute him or torture him or do any of those things. And Sweden refused to grant this agreement, saying they couldn't. And the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture, Nils Melzer, the former rapporteur, said this: in the world of diplomatic relations, the fact that Stockholm refused to issue a non-refoulement guarantee to Assange spoke a clear language and left no room for misunderstandings. So at that point, he seeks extradition. He seeks asylum with Ecuador, not because he is a fugitive sex offender like the media wants to say, but because Sweden is not willing to grant him something they need to under international law. And Ecuador, which had a very left-wing government under Rafael Correa, looked at that and said, yeah, this claim is valid. And they granted him asylum. And what's supposed to happen at that time is the British are supposed to grant him safe passage to the airport so he can fly to Ecuador. Instead, they spent millions of pounds surrounding the embassy to arrest him if he ever came out. Sweden tries to drop the extradition request, and the UK prosecutors, why the UK prosecutors care about a Swedish preliminary investigation, you can, I don't know, ask that for yourself. I don't know. Tell them, don't get cold feet. And they tried to prevent Sweden from interviewing him in the embassy. Eventually, Sweden does interview him in the embassy, and they close the case without charging him. At that point, at the request of the White House, the British police bring new charges for bail jumping, which are, we know for a Yahoo News investigation, deliberately designed to keep him trapped in the embassy. So if he leaves, they can nab him and send him to the US. What happened on April the 11th was Ecuador had a new government, Lenin Moreno, who was moving to the right, breaking with his successor, seeking an IMF loan, and trying to get the U.S. good graces. And he revoked Assange's Ecuadorian citizenship. He evoked his asylum, and then he invited the London police into the embassy to arrest him. And Assange at that point was arrested for jumping bail. Now, you don't have an international incident at an embassy over bail jumping. And later that day, while Assange was in custody, the U.S. unsealed an indictment against him, and the British police announced he had been, and I can't get over this language, further arrested in relationship to the extradition, right? He's already been arrested for bail jumping. He's in jail, and they further arrest him. I don't know what it means to be further arrested when you're already in custody. And this has begun this protracted legal struggle to extradite Julian Assange to this country, where he's facing 18 felony charges, one for conspiracy to violate the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, and the other 17 under the Espionage Act. All of these charges relate to the 2010-2011 publications that were based on materials Chelsea Manning gave to WikiLeaks. These are materials that showed war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan. These are materials that showed the State Department engaged in really bad backroom deals, including trying to pressure Haiti, one of the poorest countries in the world, from raising its minimum wage. Right? We have the State Department acting as an enforcer of U.S. corporate interest in Haiti. And it also shows the U.S. trying to avoid accountability for its crimes. Spain was investigating 3 U.S. soldiers who killed a Spanish journalist in Iraq. We know from the cables the U.S. was pressuring them to close the case. Italy actually convicted CIA agents who were involved in torture rendition. We know that they were trying to pressure them into dropping that. So the U.S. tries to evade accountability for its war crimes, but when you expose those war crimes, the U.S. is merciless in coming after you, as we saw with Chelsea Manning and as we saw with the 5 years they have been pursuing Julian Assange. Biden made the comment the other day that he was considering dropping the charges against Julian Assange. There's also been reports that the Justice Department has been entertaining some sort of plea deal that would allow Julian Assange to go free on a lesser charge based off of time served. Obviously, Julian Assange should not be charged with anything. He should be set free. But, I mean, they've had him for 5 years, 12 years, depending on how you want to count the clock. The United Nations Special Working Group on Arbitrary Detention has found he's been arbitrarily detained. The UN Special Rapporteur on Torture has found he's been tortured psychologically. You know, if he chooses to take this plea deal that lets him go free, I don't think we have any right to judge him. I would probably do that in his situation. But that's where we're at 5 years after this legal process has begun. And we're also facing a really interesting deadline in the UK. So in February, the UK had a 2-day hearing about whether or not Assange could appeal his case on free expression grounds. I was in London for this proceeding. Initially, a British judge blocked Julian Assange's extradition to the US, but rejected the press freedom arguments. She made her ruling based off of prison conditions. And then her ruling was overturned, the extradition was ordered, and now the defense was able to raise the free expression arguments. In March, in a 66-page ruling, the UK High Court of Justice said it does not violate free expression rights to prosecute Julian Assange under the Espionage Act, and that only 3 of the charges brought against him have anything to do with free expression. The rest are normal criminal conduct, and those charges where he is charged with publishing information, there wasn't a public interest in publishing it, which we know is completely nonsensical. There's tremendous public interest in what Julian Assange published. But they did say that he could appeal based on the lack of death penalty assurances. Assange is currently not facing the death penalty, but the defense said they could bring new death penalty charges. The UK prosecutors were asked by a judge about this. They said the defense is right, this could happen, and we're powerless to stop it.
Wait. Stop.
Yes, yes.
Because I want to get to the death penalty piece. You know, Attorney Darrell Jones, chairman of the Transformative Justice Coalition, we see you here and you fight here for the vote in the United States, which gives us our voice. I'm trying to figure out the death penalty. Please help me with that.
Well,
no, because people have, some very influential people have talked about locking him up forever. They've joked about him dying, being killed. This is very serious. And many of his allies, myself included, are worried about him coming back to the United States. We worry about his safety. So I'm trying to find out why, because I don't, and I'm, you know, we all know America and the UK are joined at the hip. So but I still don't understand how they walked onto Ecuadorian soil, which is what an embassy is. It's foreign soil, and they took this man out. I don't understand that. I know I've thrown a lot at you, but you got to help me.
No, I don't understand it either. I've been following it for 14 years. So the issue with the death penalty, I do want to stress with the issue of the death penalty that none of the charges against him carry the death penalty, but there is a concern that if brought to this country, they could bring a death penalty charge because Chelsea Manning was charged with aiding the enemy, and she was acquitted by a military court, which are not known for due process. And that although they did not seek the death penalty against Manning, aiding the enemy could carry the death penalty. And there is a concern from the defense that they could charge him with aiding and abetting treason, since many of the charges he's faced with are aiding and abetting Chelsea Manning. Now, I think this is a very remote possibility, and I wasn't even thinking that seriously about this claim until the prosecutor said, yes, this could happen, and we'd be powerless to stop it. The UK cannot extradite someone if they will face the death penalty, and the U.S. routinely grants death penalty assurances. The U.S. has granted assurances that it would not seek the death penalty against Edward Snowden. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is that the U.S. Department of Justice that they could argue as a foreign national, Julian Assange has no First Amendment rights, which is a problem because that would mean he would be treated differently based on his nationality. And it means that, he might not be, he would not have any free expression rights in the US, which even though the courts don't find a free expression interest in this publication, he still has to have the free expression right. So if the US does nothing, there will be an appeal on May the 20th. What the UK courts have done that is disturbing is they've given the US a chance to avoid an appeal if they guarantee certain assurances. This is they won't seek the death penalty, which I think the US will grant, and then that they will not prejudice him based on his nationality, and they will allow him to rely on the First Amendment. The rely on the First Amendment assurance is quite the wild card here because because we don't quite know what that means. My take is that it's a very low bar, and that they don't have to grant Julian Assange's defense that the First Amendment protects him. They just have to allow him to raise that motion in a pretrial motion, and that would satisfy the assurance. But other people have a more expansive view. Given the way the UK courts have handled this case, I have a very dismal view. And what it really reads to me, like the most recent decision, is that they were ready to rubber stamp the persecution of a journalist. And the US Department of Justice and the British Crown prosecution did such a bad job and just messed up on two areas where they shouldn't have, that now they can't rubber stamp it, and they're sending them this message, hey, you can fix this by doing this, this, and this. Just check these boxes. So I have a very cynical take on where this is going, and I think the UK is getting ready to extradite him and that we're at an urgent point. So I hope that when Biden said they're considering dropping this, they are.
But because Australia has asked.
Australia is part of the Five Eyes spying alliance. Australia is a major US ally, and across the political spectrum in Australia, they want Julian Assange returned. And I've listened to very conservative politicians from Australia tell people in the US, we do all these things for you in national security reasons. Australia sent troops to Vietnam. Now, I don't think anyone should have sent troops to Vietnam, but Australia did. How many countries did that? Australia sent troops to Iraq. Australia hosts a CIA NSA spy base in Pine Gap. They've done all of these things, oftentimes against the wishes of their people, and they want their citizen back. They want their country's son back. And the U.S. just says, no. I mean, what hubris on our part, right? After everything the Australians have done for us, and again, I don't think anyone should be fighting in the Vietnam or Iraq war or hosting the CIA, so I'm not. But imagine making that type of sacrifice for the U.S. security state against the wishes of your people, and they will not return Julian Assange, something that 90% of the Australian people want. And they're warning us, the ones who are pro-Australian-U.S. relationship, if you don't do this, it's going to make it really hard for us to host the CIA. It's going to make us really hard to fight in your wars.
What is, if he's extradited to Australia, what would that mean? Would he be safer? What do they want him
Australians want him returned to their country. They said enough is enough. It should end. They haven't made a charges should be dropped. It should be this or that. They want a resolution that allows him to return to Australia, which would include a plea deal like the one we're hearing rumors of.
So he would be free. He could be freed.
Yes, he should be free. Yes, he'd be free in Australia.
Would he be free to travel, or would he be confined to Australia?
I don't know all the technical details. I don't know how this would work. I do think.
Well, I get the sense that they're kind of making this up as they go along. It's just something about this is very strange, Chip Gibbons.
It's an incredibly strange case. I mean, you have the British prosecution telling the Swedish government not to drop an extradition request in a Swedish investigation. You have the British government saying they want Assange out of the embassy. and spending, they had a whole plan to get him out the embassy called Operation Pelican. Mm-hmm. And they brought in all these police and spies and whatnot to get him out. Well, you know what the best way to get Julian Assange out of the embassy would have been? To allow him to go to Ecuador, or to allow a resolution of the Swedish case. At the same time, they surrounded the embassy so he couldn't go to Ecuador, and they fought with the Swedes when the Swedes wanted to resolve the case, either by interviewing Assange in the embassy, which is perfectly permissible, or by dropping their request. And when the Swedish government closed the case due to lack of evidence, the British brought their own charge against him to keep him in the embassy. And all this time they're saying, we want him out the embassy, we want him out the embassy. Everything that has happened over the last 14 years to Julian Assange has been extremely strange. There's just no other words to describe it.
It's
not a normal case.
It was not a normal. You know what? It's very clear that he is paying the price, Attorney Daryl Jones and Chip Gibbons, for telling the truth and for striking a blow against empire. That's very clear. And I think that we who believe in freedom, as the song says, we cannot rest, and we've got to look at this, and we all ought to be concerned, because you've had some black whistleblowers. One gentleman from the CIA, didn't he go to prison?
Jeffrey Sterling.
Yes,
Jeffrey
I mean, it's
Sterling.
just, I mean,
Terry Albury, too, the only
yeah.
black FBI agent in the Minneapolis field office who was so disgusted with the racism against the Somali community in Minneapolis, who was so disgusted with the war on terror, he gave information to The Intercept, went to jail. The only black FBI officer in the Minneapolis field office was jailed for being a whistleblower under the Espionage Act, Terry Albury. And then Jeffrey Sterling's case, he had sued the CIA for racial discrimination. They dismissed his case using the state secrets doctrine, and then they prosecute him, claiming he was a source for James Risen about a program. And Sterling's case is quite interesting, about a program that to do something to Iran. And because he had also gone to the Senate Intelligence Committee, which is the lawful avenue, and reported his concerns with this program. Now, Jeffrey Sterling, I know him, he's a friend of mine. He insists to this day he was not James Risen's source. The evidence they have against him is that he called James Risen on the phone. They have the metadata. But James Risen was covering his racial discrimination suit against the CIA, right? And the chief witness against Sterling was fired from their job for leaking information to the media, I believe specifically to Ryan. So you have someone who files a racial discrimination lawsuit against the CIA, who goes to the Senate Intelligence Committee lawfully and warns them, and then they bring this prosecution against him, and he says he's innocent. He goes before a jury. The jury convicts him. I've seen very few cases that are stronger for reasonable doubt than the Sterling case. And I know people are saying, Chip's just friends with Jeffrey Sterling. Of course he thinks that. But as a pure matter of law, that case was weak. And one of the things the government did was they brought Condoleezza Rice in to testify against him. And, when you're on, one of the things they tell you about witnesses in a criminal trial is you should assess their veracity, right? Now, if I hear Condoleezza Rice is testifying, the first thing I'm going to think about is when she said, don't let the smoking gun come in the form of a mushroom cloud, right? This is someone who lied about the Iraq War, and I'm supposed to believe her. But it tells you what kind of juries they have in the Eastern District of Virginia, where everyone knows someone who works for the CIA or the Pentagon.
I mean, that's,
so yeah, it's bad.
That's Virginia. Virginia's military. Virginia's CIA. Virginia is FBI. That's what it is.
And it's particularly Eastern District of Virginia too.
Absolutely.
All of those agencies are in the Eastern District. Yeah.
So just, where do we go from here? What is next? What should we be looking out for in this case? Is there something we can do to pressure the Biden administration to help Assange's case?
There is.
Okay, we're freezing, but that's okay. Daryl, just very quickly before we bring Chip back on to close, what are you hearing? And when he comes on, of course, we'll let him back in.
Yeah, awesome. And first, Santita, you always have to tip your hat to Chip for just the incredible investigative and detailed reporting that she's able to that he's able to deliver. But interesting. One of the questions I really have as we're going through and talking about the whole Julian Assange case is that I see that President Biden is saying that they're going to look at the Assange case and make a decision as to what, if anything, the U.S. is willing to do. But I think that to bring it into the realm of where we are right now, one of the political questions that's going to be at play here is what will be the impact politically to President Biden's reelection bid if he does not proceed in this case against Julian Assange, as he decides to have the government back off of any charges. So it's a major political chance that President Biden would be taking if he should instruct the government to not go after and continue with the charges of espionage and et cetera that have been waged against Assange. The other piece that politically that weighs into this decision is that that his opponent, former President Trump, is going to be going heavily into that matter, calling Biden weak for the U.S. and all this other stuff that's going to be thrown out there. So, in making this decision with regards to what to do with Assange, all of this has got to be factored in. And I hear what Chip was saying with regards to, they're not going to go after there may be a promise that bring him to the U.S. We're not going to try to kill him and go after the death penalty. Well, also, though, what must be remembered is that President Biden is going to say, I'm not going to handcuff my department, the U.S. Department of Justice. So once they're here, if they decide that they want to go in that route, he's not going to jump in and say, no, you can't do it. So, it's a major play politically with regards to what's happening here, the timing for Julian Assange as a defense attorney. The timing for him right now could not be worse because you're coming in the middle of a high election season and something, where the contrast here between the candidates is going to be great. So it's a very, very interesting.
Remember, whistleblowing amped up under the Obama administration. So this is a transpartisan betrayal, quite frankly. And I think we have to be very, very clear on that. The establishment has clamped down on the Daniel Ellsbergs, on the Chelsea Mannings, on the Sterlings, on the on Julian Assange, and they've done it from all of. We see that the great powers of the world. This is what they've done, and we need to be real clear on that. Close us out, Chip, and I want you to come back because we're going to continue to keep this story alive, if you will, because I think it's very, very important for those of us. I mean, because it sent a chill. I mean, we now are watching newsrooms being collapsed all over the country. I mean, it's hard to find news, and they're making it very hard for the courageous who uncover malfeasance and, quite frankly, war crimes. Who wants to go through what Julian Assange or Chelsea Manning have gone through?
And they're bringing this prosecution right at a time when we see the media failing with Gaza, right? WikiLeaks was so powerful because the media had failed to cover the Iraq and Afghanistan wars properly. And now we have the media making those same mistakes with the genocidal war in Gaza. I don't know another word to describe what's happening in Gaza besides genocide. And that's really very chilling to me that this is happening right now. What I would say about it, though, is that you don't have to like Julian Assange or what WikiLeaks did to be concerned here. If they convict him under the Espionage Act, that sets the precedent that can be used against the New York Times, against the Wall Street Journal, against any other publication. That's why President Barack Obama, whose administration brought more Espionage Act prosecutions against whistleblowers than any other administration, would not charge Julian Assange. Not because they liked him, but because they knew that if they won, that would pave the way to prosecute the New York Times. So if we bring Julian Assange to stand trial in this country, the First Amendment will be on in the docket with him. So even if you hate Julian Assange, you should ask yourself, do you hate him enough to criminalize the New York Times, to criminalize Fox, whatever your media preference is? I think what WikiLeaks did was heroic. I've always said that. I've always supported their journalism, but you don't have to agree with me on that to not want to throw away the First Amendment. And I will leave people with, right now in the House, there is a bipartisan resolution, House Resolution 934, that calls on the Biden administration to drop these charges. Call your member of Congress and ask them to co-sponsor this resolution. And if they're already on it, thank them, because they're probably getting pressure from people in the national security state for having done so.
Chip Gibbons, Defending Rights and Dissent. Support this organization. They are supporting us. I cannot wait to have you back. It'll be in days, because we've got to keep this up. We've got to keep this up and keep Julian Assange at the front of our minds, everybody. There are a lot of distracting stories out here, but none are more important than this one. Thank you so much for all that you are doing.
Thank you.
Chip Gibbons. Love the mustache. Boop.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Have a good one. Appreciate it. Have a good one.
Sending you so much love. Hey, everybody, let us talk about O.J. Simpson. Wow. I was shocked this morning when I looked and saw that he had passed away at the age of 76. And of course, we're going to be talking about what's happened in Arizona with this ban on abortion. I mean, we haven't seen anything this draconian in more than 150 years. We're going to do that. But O.J. Simpson has such deep cultural, political, and social meaning to us. That case means so much. As I was watching the newscast, everybody went back to where they were the moment that they heard that he had been exonerated. And yet, today in death, he is the accused killer. There is no innocence, even when you've been cleared by a jury, which is very interesting. And I think those of us who are old enough, you have to remember what O.J. Simpson, what he was and who he was, what he meant, his cultural footprint, having won the Heisman back in the late 60s. He was someone who did not stand with the civil rights movement. And he was someone who became one of the greatest football players, one of the greatest running backs in the history of the league, the first man to rush for 2,000 yards in a single season when they had fewer games. He was absolutely magnificent, and one should not let the controversies about his personal life eclipse his greatness on the field. He is a true gridiron great. That having been said, his legacy has been all but destroyed by a charge from which he was exonerated. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about who he was. Let's talk about America's favorite pitchman. This is when Black folks did not get on TV, everybody. You all take a lot for granted now. But I mean, just not even 60 years ago, 70 years ago, Nat King Cole, one of the biggest singing stars in the world, couldn't get a sponsor. And maybe 10, 15 years later, you got I Spy and Bill Cosby on TV. But we didn't get on television. We were just breaking ground in professional sports. And then he became the pitch man for Hertz, one of the biggest corporations on earth. Everybody loved OJ. Now, everybody hates him. Whew. We've got Dwight McKee, senior advisor to Professor Cornel West. Got to get him back on so we can talk about his vice presidential pick. But of course, he is with the National Action Network, Rainbow Push, Operation Push, one of the founding members, the dean of the Ma'afa Redemption Project. Interestingly enough, Tony Covington, one of my favorite Cavaliers, former NFL player, and of course, I Am Underdog, brilliant motivational speaker and author. And of course, Daryl Jones. I want to bring up Attorney Carl Poston, who's one of the top sports lawyers in the country. As soon as we get him, well, I'm going to bring you on up, Carl. I think I can bring you up now. Can I?
Yeah.
All right. How you doing? Great, 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 great,
Let's
great.
see.
You know what? I'm so glad to have
There we go.
all
I'm sorry.
I'm so glad to have all of you here today. Why don't you frame this for us, Attorney Poston? Because it's very interesting to me. Who was O.J. Simpson? Just historically, and who did he end up being?
O.J. Simpson was an iconic.
I know that's kind of loaded, but you got it.
Can you hear me?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. O.J. Simpson was an iconic figure. He was more than black. He wasn't quite white. So color was not the issue with O.J. It was who he represented, what he represented, and how he's perceived. You cannot take away everything that he has done, and you've highlighted a lot of those issues. He has touched on every part of the American life. He was born poor in San Francisco. He became a super athlete, played at USC, and as you noted, he won the Heisman, played 11 years, an unbelievable athlete. Married at a young age, started this family, won the Heisman. And then after sports, he got involved in expanding the role of an athlete by being a role model as a broadcaster, as a movie star, and even broadened what I call the useful life of the athlete by expanding the commercial value of an athlete, which is why players and athletes are making millions and millions of dollars today. And it's not based on how long they're playing football or how long they're playing basketball, but the yellow brick road that they started when they were performing on the field or basketball court as an athlete. But now because of social media, the value of an athlete can be worth billions of dollars, like not only Michael Jordan or Magic Johnson, but you have athletes who are billionaires now. Mm-hmm. Look at LeBron. He's a billionaire and still playing basketball. So it's opened up, and a lot of that is because of what O.J. did and Jim Brown and other athletes, whether they played football or basketball. It is they were heroes as athletes. Now, don't get me wrong, he's been tarnished, but these controversies have penetrated in a way to downgrade him. And as you said, if the glove didn't fit, maybe he didn't do it, but then some people perceive it differently. So the bottom line is, like I said, he's touched all these different aspects of life, from rags to riches, to athlete, to retired, to being a hero in some communities and the villain in others. So he's covered the whole gamut, and he lives in a fishbowl just like other celebrities and athletes.
Well, everybody, what do you think? Morning Stars, please weigh in on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel and on the Santita Jackson and Friends Facebook page. Want to know what is his legacy? What is his legacy? I want to know what your thoughts are. Tony Covington, you played in the NFL. You played Division I football. I mean, and now you're a motivational speaker. I mean, you kind of followed an arc that we've seen, and let's say, Attorney Poston, we have to go back to Jackie Robinson, who pivoted out of baseball into becoming a corporate vice president for Chock full of nuts. And then he used his stature to help raise money for the civil rights movement. And he really helped to set the pace for us. And OJ, as you rightly pointed out, did it in a whole different way. And you just see all of the athletes of today are able to benefit from that. Tony Covington.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult because as Mr. Poston stated, he did so many groundbreaking things. I think what he did as an NFL, so we kind of got to do it in segments. What he did as an NFL player was just extraordinary. just absolutely extraordinary.
Was it really?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. You know, because to be able to, the first player to rush for 2,000 yards, Heisman Trophy, first pick by the Bills, just the extraordinary things that he did as an athlete, you know, puts him at the top of the game as a Hall of Famer, of course.
Mhm.
Now, then when you talk about the commercial aspect of him breaking grounds for being a black athlete who became a major pitch man. I mean, you know, just I still remember when I was young seeing OJ running through the airport. Anytime I felt like I was late for a plane, I'm running through the airport like OJ trying to catch my flight.
Go
You know,
OJ.
yeah, you know, and that's just kind of how what we saw him as. And then, you know, suddenly we see him in a white Bronco, you
Mm.
know, on TV, and we're all staring at the television like, okay, what the heck is happening? And then everything that unfolded with that, everyone's going to have their opinion of, you know, if guilty or innocent, but he was proven innocent. You know, he was acquitted. You know, and so I got to just stick with that. You know, as Brother Poston said, you know, the glove didn't fit. You know, so I have to
Acquit.
I have to put it right where that is, you know. And then, you know, other issues with him having to spend some time incarcerated, and you know, so it kind of gives you a mixed bag of things, you know. But that's a black man's life, you know. It is very much a mixed bag. There are highs and lows, and we all know, you know, we don't always get a fair shot simply because of the color of our skin, so we're constantly battling against that part, you know. And so you talk about somebody who was at the top of the game and everybody loved him, or everybody appeared to love him, until he made a mistake. And then it all came crashing down, and he's the scum of the earth. He's the worst this. And from that point on, you know, he stayed true to who he was, and he kind of thumbed his nose at the establishment, you know, and he just didn't care. And that bothered people too, because they didn't feel like he showed enough contrition. And you know, I just take that for what it's worth. I will just always remember him as a great football player. You know, and that's kind of it. That's my stance.
Well, no, but that's a whole lot, because if you look at the corporate media today, Daryl Jones, he is the accused murderer. Everyone's talking about Nicole Brown Simpson. No one knew her as Nicole Brown. She was Nicole Simpson. And he made her whole family comfortable. And just it is. I said, you know, and no one mentions that they didn't bury Robert Blake with that.
Mm-hmm.
Even though he went into the restaurant, came out, and his wife was dead. I mean, you know, I don't understand that. And then you had Mark Furman, who was an avowed racist, problematic. So what about? I mean, it's interesting that Attorney Poston, Tony Covington. It's interesting what this narrative in this conversation. You want to start with his greatness. It's like that you cannot take from him, and we're not hearing that today. What are your thoughts today?
Well, you know, Santita, it's really interesting. When I think of O.J. Simpson, much like Brother Covington and Brother Poston, remember the commercial, the Hertz commercials, and all the other things that really lifted him and made him greater than life, right? Bigger than the experience. But I tell you what else, and just sitting back and listening and just reflecting on some of the things. I think that with O.J. Simpson, we had the great player on the field. We had the phenomenal actor and everything else with the commercials. But there were also other firsts that came through everything that he went through, right? You know, when he was going through that trial in California in this case, many in the African American community, and I heard Brother Covington say that he was innocent. I don't know, I don't apply I'm of course, through my lawyer hat on, I don't apply the label of innocent to him, but I do apply the label of not guilty to him. And I say that with this type of distinction. Innocent means that you didn't do anything at all, right? Not guilty means they did not prove the case against you. And I think that what white America had a problem with was seeing the justice system, judicial system being held to an account for its evidence. So when you had the racist Mark Furman and the information that was brought out that contradicted information that he was bringing forward, saying he'd never used the N-word, and then it having disclosed that he lied. He was just a liar. He was a lying racist person. So you had to discount his testimony and discounting other pieces of the evidence. And when things were found, when things weren't found, was the glove planted? Because Furman was the only one to find it. When they did the whole sweep of the place, they didn't find it. And when they did the big sweep, they didn't find it. All of that led to the not guilty finding. And it forced America really to look at this Black man as a person that received justice in his case based on the evidence that was then presented. And that's where a lot of the uproar and the upset came over. I can recall, because I was a young lawyer at that point, and I was sitting in Washington, D.C. with other attorneys during the last part of a course that we had to do for passing the bar, and watching all the white attorneys that were in the room so upset with the verdict, and watching the 4 or 5 Black attorneys that were in the room that just sort of sat there and smiled and said justice was served. He shouldn't have been found guilty based on the evidence. And I say all this to say of O.J. Simpson that even when he was going through his troubles, he was breaking barriers. Still breaking barriers. Johnny Cochran became the household name because of O.J. Simpson. He forced Johnny Cochran and F. Lee Bailey to work together, right? We would not. I don't think we would have seen that. So even through his trials and tribulations, America continued to grow from his experiences. Granted, there was a great separation, but the great separation, I think, in the trial aspect of it, was seeing the pride of African Americans and saying, he got justice. Whether or not he did it, the evidence wasn't sufficient and the jury got it right. And that's, I think, was one of the big continuing contributions of the experience that O.J. Simpson went through. Now, the rest of the stuff, that identified with the civil case and all those other things, that's a whole different matter. But people, I think, became enamored and stuck on the point of the trial and the experience and the Bronco chase and all the other stuff. And just seeing the wealth that O.J. was able to accumulate, and to see that wealth from a Black man play out in the courtroom to him being found not guilty. I think that's what a lot of people were wrestling with.
Dwight McKee, I've got about 5 minutes before we go into the second hour of this discussion. Dwight, your thoughts?
Well, it's very interesting is that people don't know this, but O.J.'s role model, personal role model, personality role model was Ernie Banks, my mentor. He and Ernie were cousins, and they shared 2 grandmothers who were twins. And so Ernie was his hero growing up. And Ernie, who did the role Mr. Cub, had this tremendous charisma to learn how to captivate white people. And O.J. as a kid studied that. And so by the time he got to USC, he had that down as a science. But he also had a dark side that, extended beyond his own public persona, coming out of those projects that he also carried with him. So he was really a phenomenon because he was one of the first Black athletes who understood the science of captivating white people. I totally agree with what the lawyer just said, is that he was really not defined as or declared innocent. He was declared not guilty. And it was because they tampered with the evidence. People have not processed that both could be true, that he could have been guilty and they also have tampered with the evidence. And so when you look at what was going on in Los Angeles at the time, coming out of the Rodney King beatings, coming out of what was happening with the riots, coming out with the police brutality, understanding what the rap groups were talking about, the guys with attitudes were talking about, there was always already a predisposition that the police were corrupt and could do anything. There were no limits to. So Johnny Cochran was able to manipulate that in such a way with mostly black and colored people jury, Hispanic jury, that they could draw on their own experiences and really believe that these corrupt police
Mhm.
would have planted evidence. And all of the evidence supports the fact that they probably did. So I think that when you really, really look at it, what they did more than anything else was to expose the double standard
Mhm.
and the schizophrenia in America.
Mhm.
Because white people saw it as a miscarriage of justice, black people saw it as a vindication of all the things they had talked about.
Mhm.
In many ways, both of them could have been right on this one. Once it happened, America was really never the same. And it carries over even when you see what's happening with the mega crowd and the Democratic, the Biden crowd, the intense division we have today in society really is a reflection of and a carryover from that schism.
Well, everybody stay tuned for the second hour. We've got a lot more to talk about. Tony Covington, you're not going to be with us in the next hour. I am underdog, former NFL player, and just former Cavalier. Talk to me. You have the last minute. I'll give to you.
I just it's just great to be on and have these kind of discussions. You always bring such truth to power, and so I'm thankful for you. I thank you for inviting me on the show, and just continue to do the great work that you do. Because if we don't tell our stories, then we don't control the narrative, then we allow somebody else to. And as I like to say, if you don't take risks, then you end up working for people who do.
Hello, hello.
Mm.
And this is our narrative, and we are giving this Attorney Carl Poston and Attorney Daryl Jones and Tony Covington and Dwight McKee from another perspective that we're not hearing in corporate media today. People are trying to take away that which made us pay attention to uh, O.J. Simpson in the first place. Many people don't know his health challenges as a child, his personal challenges as a child. They don't know that. And we never really heard Nicole's story, which was a very complicated one, to be fair. So there's a lot that we didn't hear. There's a lot that we did not hear, but we're going to talk about it some more in the second hour of the Santita Jackson Show. Stay tuned right here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Back in just a moment.